At our dinner, parents declared, "Your role is to toil away so your sister can chase her dreams." Don't like it? There's the door. I replied, "Great. I'm out. Good luck surviving without my money." Last Thanksgiving, I walked into my parents' dining room after an 80-hour work week. I had 3 major hotel design contracts sitting on my desk, my eyes were burning from staring at blueprints, and our family's high-end architectural supply store was actively bleeding cash. Before I could even take off my coat, my dad looked right at me and delivered a line that shattered 20 years of blind loyalty. He told me that my role in the family was to work, so my sister could dream. He told me that if I did not like it, there was the door. So, I took it. But before I tell you exactly how their entire financial house of cards collapsed without me, you need to understand the foundation it was built on. My name is Clara. I am 31 years old, working as a commercial interior designer in Austin, Texas. Austin is a city that is growing fast, expensive, and totally relentless, which is a pretty good way to describe my career, too. For as long as I can remember, my life has been nothing but a stepping stone for my older sister, Stella. Stella is 34 now, and she has spent her entire life floating on the delusion that she is a misunderstood, free-spirited artist. Our family dynamic was established early and enforced daily. My parents, Harrison and Caroline, own a legacy home decor and architectural supplies store. It is the kind of place that sells custom pinewood beams, imported ceramic tiles, and high-end fixtures. Growing up, the store was the center of our universe. It smelled like sawdust, strong coffee, and stress. But the way my parents treated us in that store was a masterclass in favoritism. I was always the invisible workhorse. I was the kid who wore practical jeans, usually covered in dust from the warehouse or ink from the office printer. The moment I was old enough to use a calculator, my dad handed me one and told me to start checking invoices. By the time I was 10, I knew the difference between a net 30 and a net 60 payment term. I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the useful one. Then there was Stella. Stella was always dressed beautifully, smelling like expensive lavender essential oils, talking loudly about her latest source of inspiration. She would come into the store, sit at the front counter, and sketch chaotic little doodles on the backs of expensive order forms. My parents would look at her like she was magic. They truly believed she was destined for greatness and that her creative spirit needed to be protected from the harsh realities of the world. And who was supposed to shield her from those harsh realities? Me, of course. My job was to handle the dirt, the numbers, and the heavy lifting, so Stella could keep her hands clean and her mind focused on her art. I just did not realize until much later that this arrangement was meant to be permanent. The architecture of their favoritism was built brick by brick during our childhood. It was not always explosive screaming matches. Most of the time, it was just the quiet, devastating realization that we lived by 2 completely different sets of rules. I clearly remember a freezing, rainy Tuesday evening when I was 12 years old. The store had received a massive shipment, and the packing materials were overflowing. My dad told me to take the trash out to the alley dumpsters. It was pouring rain, the Texas winter wind was biting, and the black plastic garbage bags were almost as heavy as I was. I dragged them through the mud, slipping and freezing, my hands turning raw. When I finally came back inside, shivering and soaked to the bone, I found Stella sitting in the warm back office. She was drinking a cup of hot cocoa with marshmallows, casually painting a watercolor sunset. My mother, Caroline, was standing over her, rubbing her shoulders, telling her how brilliant her use of color was. Nobody asked if I needed a towel. Nobody even looked at me. I just walked to the bathroom, dried my hair with a rough paper towel, and went back to organizing the stockroom. 2 years later, when I was 14, I entered a regional architectural design competition for middle schoolers. I spent 3 months building a scaled floor plan for a community center using only recycled materials. I poured my soul into it, staying up late with a small flashlight under my blankets. I actually won first place. My project was displayed at the city library for a month. I rushed home with my certificate, practically vibrating with pride, expecting a hug or maybe a celebratory dinner. I found my dad behind the register. I handed him the certificate. He glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds, handed it back, and said, "That is nice, Clara. Did you finish recounting the brass hinges in aisle 4? My heart sank into my stomach. I put the certificate in my backpack and went to count the hinges. A month later, Stella turned in a deeply mediocre, finger paint-level abstract project for her high school art class. The teacher gave her a B-, but my parents acted like she had just been accepted into the Louvre. My mother took the canvas, paid over $100 to have it professionally framed, and hung it proudly right behind the main cash register. That weekend, they bought Stella a brand new, very expensive iPad so she could explore digital art. That was the exact moment my brain internalized a very toxic lesson. I learned that my worth in our family was purely transactional. I had to earn my space, earn my food, and earn my right to exist by being endlessly useful. I was an employee who happened to live in their house. Stella, on the other hand, had intrinsic value. She was loved unconditionally, simply for being Stella. By the time I reached high school, the divide between us had turned into a massive canyon. I was essentially running the back-end logistics of the family store while trying to survive my teenage years. I juggled advanced placement classes, SAT prep, and the unrelenting demands of my father's business. My senior year was supposed to be my time to shine, but it felt like a prison sentence. The most painful memory is still my high school senior prom. I had actually saved up my own money from a small side hustle to buy a dress. It was a simple, dark blue dress I found on clearance, but I loved it. I had a date, a nice guy from my chemistry class, and for once, I was excited to just be a normal teenager. But 2 days before the dance, our store received a massive, delayed shipment of imported Italian floor tiles. The inventory system crashed, and everything was a mess. Harrison, my dad, looked at me in a panic and said he needed me to stay overnight at the warehouse to manually recount and log every single box, or we would miss a major delivery deadline for a contractor. I begged him. I told him about the prom. I showed him the blue dress. He just sighed, gave me a look of deep disappointment, and said, "Clara, this family depends on this store. Your sister needs art supplies, your mother needs her medication, and you want to go dance in a gymnasium? I thought you were more responsible than that." The guilt was suffocating. I canceled my date. I hung the blue dress in the back of my closet, put on my dusty jeans, and spent prom night sitting on a cold concrete floor, counting boxes of Italian marble until the sun came up. In that exact same month, Stella decided she was bored with her community college classes. She had been enrolled for exactly 3 weeks before deciding the professors were stifling her creative aura. She dropped out. There were no consequences. No disappointment from my dad. Instead, my mother convinced him that Stella just needed the right tools to express her vision. They went to a specialty electronics store and bought her a professional-grade camera with multiple lenses, dropping at least $1,500, telling her to document her life journey. Sitting in the warehouse, with dust in my lungs and numbers swimming in my head, I felt the resentment finally take root deep in my chest. It was a hard, heavy knot. I realized then that they were stealing my milestones to pave the road for Stella's fantasies. That realization solidified my drive. I swore to myself I would study hard, get a massive college scholarship, and escape. But getting out physically was only half the battle. Untangling the financial chains they wrapped around me took a lot longer. I did manage to get into a great design program for college, but the scholarship only covered a fraction of the tuition. Leaving home meant I had to fund my own survival. Those 4 years were a blur of absolute exhaustion. I took out massive student loans that kept me awake at night, sweating with anxiety. I worked 3 different part-time jobs just to keep my head above water. I woke up at 5 in the morning to work the breakfast shift at a local diner, ran to my classes, worked the front desk at the campus library in the afternoons, and took on freelance drafting work for local contractors late into the night. I lived in a freezing, cramped apartment with 3 roommates, surviving mostly on cheap ramen noodles and peanut butter. I was fighting tooth and nail for my future. Meanwhile, my parents decided it was the perfect time to heavily invest in Stella's artistic growth. Because Stella had been feeling uninspired sitting at home, Harrison and Caroline decided to fund a full year of study abroad in Florence, Italy for her. They did not just pay for a program. They paid for everything. I would sit in the campus library, crunching the numbers in my head because I could not help it. I calculated the out-of-state tuition, the expensive housing in the historic center of Florence, the round-trip international flights, and the generous monthly allowance they sent her so she could buy authentic gelato and genuine Italian leather bags. She even posted photos on social media of a shiny red Vespa scooter she rented for the year to get around the cobblestone streets. Every time I looked at my bank account and saw a balance of $42, I would see another photo of Stella sipping wine under the Tuscan sun, captioned with quotes about finding inner peace. The financial disparity was sickening. They were willing to drain their savings to give her a European vacation disguised as education, while they let their younger daughter drown in high-interest debt just 2 towns over. When I graduated with honors, carrying $50,000 in student loan debt, neither of them came to my ceremony. My mother texted me saying the store was too busy and Stella was feeling jet-lagged from her flight back from Europe. I took my diploma, went back to my cheap apartment, and started applying for commercial design firms. I thought the worst of their financial enabling was over. I was completely wrong. When Stella returned from Italy, she brought back 0 academic credits, no portfolio, but a massive ego and a brand new obsession: healing crystals and bohemian aesthetics. She convinced my parents that her true calling was not painting, but curating spiritual energy. She wanted to open a boutique in a very trendy, incredibly expensive neighborhood in downtown Austin. I told my dad it was a terrible idea. I told him the retail market was brutal and commercial leases in that area were financial suicide for someone with no business experience. He waved me off, telling me I lacked vision and that Stella had a unique gift for connecting with people's auras. I did not realize how deep they had gone until a few months later. I was visiting the family store to help them with some end-of-year tax filing because, of course, they still expected me to do their accounting for free. While sorting through a stack of disorganized mail on my dad's desk, I found the bank documents. My blood ran cold. Harrison and Caroline had secretly remortgaged our family home. They took out a massive loan against the equity of the house to secure the commercial lease, buy expensive inventory, and cover the initial operating costs for Stella's boutique. The store, which she named the Celestial Canvas, was an absolute disaster from day one. Stella hired her lazy friends to work the register. She bought ridiculously expensive imported glass display cases, velvet curtains, and custom-made incense. But she rarely showed up to open the shop on time. She would arrive at noon, light some sage, take a few selfies for Instagram, and leave early. It was a slow, agonizing death. I watched the numbers from afar. The revenue barely covered the electric bill, let alone the premium rent or the payroll. Suppliers started calling the family house looking for payment. After exactly 8 months, the boutique filed for bankruptcy. The doors closed, the imported glass cases were sold for pennies, and Stella simply shrugged it off, claiming the city's energy was too toxic for her business model. But the damage was done. The boutique was gone, but the debt from the remortgaged house was very real, and the monthly payments were astronomical. My parents had gambled their financial security on a 34-year-old child's fleeting hobby, and they lost everything. And predictably, when the ship started sinking, they looked for their reliable lifeboat. They looked at me. With the massive new remortgage payment looming over their heads, the family hardware store started feeling the squeeze. Online competition was already hurting their sales, and now they were suffocating under the weight of Stella's failed experiment. That is when the manipulation shifted into high gear. My parents panicked, but instead of holding Stella accountable, who was currently living rent-free in their basement, complaining about her creative block, they targeted me. My mother, Caroline, was a master at weaponizing her health. Suddenly, every phone call was about her deteriorating condition. She would call me in tears, talking about her fake heart palpitations, her chronic back pain, and how the stress of the bank taking the house was going to put her in an early grave. She would cry softly into the phone, saying, "Clara, you are doing so well at your new firm. We supported you so much when you were growing up. Please, we just need a little help to get through this rough patch." The guilt trip worked. Despite all my anger, I still suffered from a massive savior complex. I could not stand the thought of my parents being thrown out onto the street. So, I agreed to manage the store's complex accounting books remotely, entirely for free, working late into the night after finishing my actual demanding job. But that was not enough. To cover the gap in their mortgage, I started wiring them $1,800 every single month. I was making a decent salary at my design firm, but wiring that much money away meant I was still living like a broke college student. I drove a beat-up car, lived in a tiny apartment with bad plumbing, and put my own dreams on hold. My boyfriend, Wyatt, watched this happen with growing horror. Wyatt is an accountant, a deeply logical, grounded guy who represents everything my family is not: clear boundaries and accountability. One night, as he watched me crying over a spreadsheet at 2 in the morning, he gently closed my laptop. He looked me right in the eyes and said, "Clara, you are setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. They are not asking for a life raft. They are using you as an engine for a luxury yacht that is already sinking." I knew he was right. Every month I sent that $1,800. I felt a piece of my self-respect die. I was funding the consequences of their favoritism. But the fear of breaking the family apart kept me paralyzed. I needed a catalyst to finally cut the cord. I just did not expect that catalyst to arrive in the form of a luxury spa receipt on Thanksgiving Day. Thank you for listening to the story up to this point. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you very much. The week of Thanksgiving felt like a slow-motion car crash. In my professional life, I was at the absolute peak of my career. I had just been handed the lead role in designing a 40-suite boutique hotel in Taos, New Mexico. It was a career-defining contract, the kind that puts your name in architectural digests. But the pressure was immense. I was working 80-hour weeks, surviving on cold caffeine and pure adrenaline. My desk was a graveyard of fabric swatches, reclaimed wood samples, and blue light-blocking glasses. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 weeks. But in my family life, the pressure was even worse. My father, Harrison, was relentlessly blowing up my phone. To him, my career was just a little hobby that got in the way of my real duty, saving his failing store. Every morning at 6 a.m., I'd have an email from him with a subject line like "Urgent," "Q4 tax prep," or "Inventory discrepancy." He didn't care that I was designing luxury hotel lobbies in Albuquerque. He wanted me to figure out why 3 boxes of premium oil paints were missing from the Tuesday shipment. On the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I hit my breaking point. I had stayed up until 3 in the morning finishing a rendering for the hotel lobby, a beautiful blend of Southwestern textiles and modern minimalism. My eyes were bloodshot, and my back was aching from the ergonomic chair that didn't feel so ergonomic anymore. When I finally closed my laptop, I saw a text from my mother, Caroline. It wasn't a "Happy Thanksgiving" or "Drive safe." It was a photo of a pile of unpaid utility bills and a message saying, "The store lights might be cut off by Friday if you don't look at the spreadsheets. Your father is so stressed, Clara." I drove the 20 minutes to my parents' house on Thanksgiving morning feeling like a ghost. The Texas sun was bright, but I felt cold. I was physically shaking from exhaustion, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I just wanted one meal where I didn't have to talk about profit and loss margins. I wanted to be a daughter for once, not a pro bono accountant. I walked through the front door, smelling the roasted turkey and sage stuffing, and for a split second, I hoped things would be different. I was wrong. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, the air changed. There was no "welcome home" or "we missed you." Harrison was standing by the fridge, clutching a platter of deviled eggs. He looked at me with that familiar edge of disappointment and said, "You're late. The new acrylic shipment came in yesterday, and there's still no inventory update on the server. I expected more from you, Clara." I didn't even have the energy to argue. I just bit my lip, set down the green bean casserole I had spent my only hour of free time making, and headed to the dining room. My mother was fussing over the crystal bowls, looking at me with those performative sad eyes she uses whenever she wants something. Then Stella arrived. She swept into the room 20 minutes later, looking like she had just stepped off a private jet. She was wearing a camel-colored designer coat and carrying a glossy shopping bag that practically screamed expensive. She didn't look tired. She didn't have dark circles under her eyes. She looked refreshed, glowing, and completely untroubled. With a flourish, she pulled a pristine white leather handbag out of the bag, a luxury piece that I knew cost more than my car. "Look what Mom and Dad surprised me with after my Sedona spa weekend," she announced, holding it up like a trophy. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Sedona?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow. Stella smirks, patting her perfectly blow-dried hair. "Oh, it was divine. Massages, facials, sunrise yoga overlooking the red rocks. It was exactly what I needed to clear my artistic block." I looked at my mother. "You paid for a $3,000 spa retreat?" "It was an early birthday treat, honey," Caroline beamed, completely oblivious to the fire starting in my chest. "Your sister needed a reward after closing that big influencer deal." I knew exactly what that deal was. It was a single sponsored post for a local crystal shop that probably didn't even cover her gas money. I looked at the luxury bag on the table. Then I looked at my own hands, stained with ink and callous from work. I thought about the $1,800 I had wired them last week, money that was supposed to save the family home, but had clearly just funded my sister's vacation. The silence in the room became deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel and the sound of my own pulse thumping in my ears. I set my glass down with a slow, deliberate click. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice steady but vibrating with a decade of suppressed rage. "I am working 80 hours a week. I am managing your suppliers, fixing your botched accounting, and wiring you $1,800 a month of my hard-earned money to keep you from being foreclosed on. And while I'm doing that, you're using my money to buy Stella a luxury handbag and a $3,000 spa trip because she's stressed." My father didn't even flinch. He set his fork down with a force that made the china rattle. He looked me dead in the eye, and without a hint of remorse, he said the words that finally broke the spell. "Your job is to work while your sister enjoys life, Clara. Simple as that. She has a gift, you have a work ethic. If you don't like the way this family functions, then there's the door." The room went completely still. My mother's hand froze halfway to the gravy boat. Stella just rolled her eyes and took a sip of her wine, muttering something about me being a drama queen. In that moment, something inside me snapped clean. It wasn't a slow burn, it was an instant, icy clarity. The guilt that had kept me chained to them for years simply evaporated. I realized I wasn't a daughter to them, I was a utility. I was the engine that kept their delusions running. "The door is that way?" I replied, pushing my chair back with a loud, jarring scrape that echoed off the adobe walls. "Fine. I'm taking it." I grabbed my keys from the hook by the fridge, the same hook where Stella's childhood finger paintings were still hanging, laminated like holy relics. "Clara, honey, sit down," my mother started, her voice cracking with those fake tears. "We're grateful, really." "No, you're not," I said, looking her right in the eye. "You're just worried about who's going to pay the mortgage in December." "Well, it won't be me. Good luck surviving without my money." I walked out. Harrison's voice chased me down the hallway, shouting about how ungrateful I was after everything they'd done for me, but I didn't stop. I stepped out into the cold November air, slid into my car, and roared out of the driveway. I drove straight to Wyatt's apartment, my knuckles white on the wheel, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could actually breathe. The next morning, I didn't wake up to the sound of my alarm. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating off the nightstand. I didn't answer it. Instead, I sat up, drank a glass of water, and began the methodical process of reclaiming my life. First, I logged into my bank portal. I went to the scheduled transfers and deleted the recurring $1,800 payment to my parents' account. Just like that, their December mortgage disappeared. Next, I opened my professional laptop and revoked my own administrative access to the family store's accounting software. I didn't want to see the red ink anymore. I didn't want to be responsible for their failures. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and went to get coffee with Wyatt. When I finally checked my call log that evening, I saw 47 missed calls. 47. There were voicemails from Harrison that started as angry demands and ended with him slamming the receiver. There were messages from my mother crying about her degenerative disc disease and how she couldn't lift the new boxes of inventory without me. Then there was the voice note from Stella. Her voice was breezy and entitled. Hey sis, look, things are a little tight right now, but I have this amazing idea for a paint and sip pop-up night. I just need $10,000 to secure the venue and buy the high-end supplies. You're so good with numbers, just wire it over and I'll pay you back with interest once it takes off, okay? I didn't even reply. I just deleted the note and added her number to my temporary block list. Over the next few days, the silence on my end was absolute. I focused entirely on my hotel design contract. I threw myself into mood boards, stone samples, and lighting schematics. For the first time in a decade, my mental bandwidth wasn't being consumed by someone else's emergency. But while I was finally finding peace, their world was beginning to burn. My father sent one last text before I officially changed my number. It was a photo of an empty register drawer with the caption, "This is on you, Clara. The lights stay on because of your spreadsheets. Come fix this, or we lose everything." I didn't fix it. I deleted the thread, powered off my old SIM card, and let the quiet settle in. The fallout at the store happened even faster than I expected. Without me there to manage the complex back-end logistics, the business simply stopped functioning. About a week after I walked out, the store lost its biggest annual contract, the one with the Austin Public Schools art program. The district buyer actually reached out to me on my professional email because I was the only person who had ever handled their invoicing and purchase orders. She explained that without the updated inventory proof and the proper tax documentation, they couldn't renew the spring semester contract. That was $12,000 in bulk sales gone in a single afternoon. Harrison tried to blame it on supply chain issues in a voicemail to the district, but the truth was he just didn't know how to fill out the paperwork. By the end of the second week, the store's main supplier of professional-grade paints and canvases placed them on a strict credit hold. They owed $9,000 in outstanding balances that were long overdue. Without new inventory, the shelves started to look like a ghost town. Customers who had been loyal for 20 years started walking out when they couldn't find the basic supplies they needed. And then there was Stella. Her influencer career, which had been propped up by my parents' credit cards, dried up almost overnight. Her last sponsored post for a boutique candle maker got fewer than 500 likes, and the brand pulled out of their planned collaboration. With no income and the rent due on her trendy downtown loft, she had no choice but to pack her designer suitcases into her leased SUV and move back into the basement of our parents' house. My mother sent me a photo of Stella's old twin bed, made up with fresh linens, captioned with a single heart emoji, trying to guilt me into a family reunion. I didn't even open the message. I left it on read and went back to work on my boutique hotel project. They had chosen to support Stella's dreams over my reality, and now they were all living in the nightmare that created. Maintaining my boundaries was the hardest thing I've ever done. For the first month, I felt like I was constantly fighting the urge to check on them. Years of being the fixer had wired my brain to respond to their panic. Every time my phone vibrated, my stomach would do a somersault. But Wyatt was my rock. Every time he saw me wavering, he would sit me down and remind me of the math. "Clara," he would say, "they had $3,000 for a spa trip but $0 for their own mortgage. That wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. If you go back now, you're telling them that their choice was right." The flying monkeys, as the internet calls them, started coming out of the woodwork soon after. Distant cousins and old family friends who hadn't spoken to me in years began messaging me on social media. They called me cold-hearted and told me that family comes first, regardless of the cost. They sent links to articles about adult children abandoning their aging parents. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I realized that if I engaged with them, I was just giving them more ammunition. Instead, I took a scorched earth approach to my digital life. I deleted my personal social media accounts. I changed my mailing address at the post office so they couldn't send me manipulative letters. I became a ghost to everyone except the people who actually cared about my well-being. I focused all that redirected energy into my career. I spent my evenings at the firm, perfecting the mood boards for the Taos Hotel. I traveled to New Mexico to source hand-woven rugs and custom turquoise-inlaid vanities. The mental bandwidth that used to be consumed by my father's supplier invoices was now fueled by creativity and professional growth. I was finally investing in myself, and for the first time, the returns were magnificent. The final blow didn't come from me. It came from the government. About a month into the silence, my Aunt Hazel showed up at my apartment unannounced. Hazel is my mother's older sister, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been a silent minority partner in the store since the 80s. She sat at my kitchen table, looking tired, and slid a thick manila envelope across the wood grain. Inside was a formal notice of deficiency from the IRS. It turns out that Harrison had been playing a very dangerous game with the store's taxes for years. To fund Stella's failed boutique and her various artistic journeys, he had been inflating business deductions. He had claimed Stella's personal travel, her luxury art supplies, and even the rent for her gallery as essential business expenses for the hardware store. The IRS had flagged the discrepancies between the store's reported losses and the actual bank deposits. Now, they were demanding $50,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. Because Aunt Hazel was still listed as a secondary contact on the old business filings, she had received a courtesy copy of the audit notice. "They're drowning, Clara," Hazel said, tapping the final page of the report. "The bank is already 2 payments away from foreclosing on the house because they can't make the payments without your monthly transfers. This IRS debt is the final nail." Later that day, Harrison called me from the store landline, the only number I hadn't blocked yet. His voice was cracked, stripped of all the old bravado. "Clara, Hazel told us she saw you. Look, we're not asking for money. Just come back for 1 month. Fix the books. Get us through this audit. The accountant we hired for the boutique botched everything. We'll pay you consultant rates once the cash flow stabilizes, I promise." I listened to him, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No guilt. No anger. Just a profound sense of finality. "No," I said. It was the simplest word I had ever spoken. "Clara, please," he whispered. "We're your family." "No," I repeated. "You told me my role was to work so Stella could enjoy life. Well, I'm done working for you. You should ask the golden child to fix your taxes. Maybe she can pay the IRS in watercolors." I hung up. I drafted a formal legal notice of financial separation, stating that I would no longer provide any monetary support or business services. I sent it via certified mail and never looked back. 6 months passed in a blur of progress and peace. The Taos Hotel project was a massive, award-winning success. Because of the performance bonuses tied to the project's LEED certification, my annual salary jumped from $92,000 to $129,000. For the first time in my life, I had a savings account that wasn't being drained by someone else's bad decisions. I used that money to close on a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in downtown Austin. It had high adobe ceilings, a corner fireplace, and a private balcony that overlooked the city skyline. It was mine. Every square inch of it was paid for by my own labor, and I didn't owe a single person an explanation for it. The night I moved in, Wyatt helped me unload the final box. The apartment was still mostly empty, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off the bare oak floors. He stopped in the middle of the living room, reached into his pocket, and dropped to one knee. He didn't have a diamond ring. Instead, he held a ring he had sketched and commissioned himself, a white gold band with a single, raw New Mexico turquoise stone, a nod to the project that had finally set me free. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've watched you carry the weight of an entire family for years. I want to be the person who helps you carry nothing but happiness. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. We stood on the balcony that night, watching the Austin lights twinkle, and I realized that by closing the door on my past, I had opened an entire world for my future. My life was no longer a resource for others to exploit. It was a story that I was finally writing for myself. I still hear things about them occasionally from Aunt Hazel, though I never ask. The karma that hit them wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing grind of reality. To pay off the $50,000 IRS lien and avoid actual jail time for tax fraud, Harrison and Caroline were forced to liquidate the store. A regional franchise from Albuquerque bought the remaining inventory for 60 cents on the dollar. After the lawyers, the bank, and the government took their cuts, my parents walked away with exactly $4,300 in their pockets. They lost the family home. They now live in a cramped, 800-square-foot one-bedroom apartment in a noisy part of town. The walls are thin, and the rent is capped by a low-income housing program. My father, at 62 years old, finally learned what it feels like to truly toil. He accepted a night shift position at a shipping warehouse, scanning and loading heavy packages from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He makes $21 an hour and comes home with bruised shins and a sore back, the kind of physical exhaustion I used to feel every single day. My mother tries to contribute by setting up a folding easel on the sidewalk during tourist weekends. She sells small watercolor sketches of Austin landmarks for $20 apiece. On a good weekend, she makes enough for groceries and her prescription copays. She once tried to text me a photo of her first sale, but the message came back undeliverable. I hope she realized then that her performative tears no longer have a recipient. And then there's Stella. The golden child was finally forced to enter the real world. She works as a cashier at a Hobby Lobby on the south side of town. She spends 8 hours a day under buzzing fluorescent lights, scanning other people's art supplies and dealing with angry customers. After months of perfect attendance, because she actually has to pay her own bills now, she was promoted to the custom framing department. Her Instagram has changed, too. It's no longer about auras and inner peace in Sedona. Now she posts raw, unfiltered clips of herself cutting glass and mixing custom tints, narrating the mistakes she makes. Ironically, her follower count has actually climbed because people are finally drawn to her unfiltered grind rather than her fake luxury. Consequences taught them what indulgence never could. My father learned punctuality. My mother learned the true market value of her brushstrokes. And Stella learned that competence is built one precise cut at a time. I didn't abandon them. I simply stopped paying the price for their mistakes. Some doors close so that you can finally find the one that leads you home. So, Reddit, looking back at everything. Am I wrong for walking out and letting their financial house of cards completely collapse? Should I ever consider helping them out now that they've lost everything, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know what you would have done. Thank you for watching and sticking with this story until the very end. If this hit home, or if you just love a good karma story, please hit that like button and subscribe. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss out on daily Reddit drama. See you in the next video.